I'm Abby Peltomaa, and I have with me Julia Crain and Kayla Lappin, and so we'll be collaborating on this presentation, but we're pretty informal, so if at any time you have questions, feel free. We're hopefully going to leave a lot of time at the end, too, so you can ask lots of questions about the pit, because that's probably why a lot of folks are here, although we realize a lot of folks in this room are some of the experts that we ask questions of. So, we're going to dive right in. So this is kind of our overview, what we're going to be talking about, what we're talking about when we're talking about the pit, what we're afraid to talk about when we're talking about the pit, especially addressing like some of the information and how do we convey that to the public, and what do we talk affirmatively about the Berkeley Pit. So I'm going to jump in. I realize, like, show of hands, all of you probably know about the Berkeley Pit. I get it. But I really wanted to take this opportunity to actually first show off how beautiful this is. Sorry, Kayla. I've been dying to showcase this thing because I just think that they did such an amazing job, all of the collaborators on it. So Berkeley Pit History, right? Kind of just get a feel of like how clean this guy is. So you can jump right on. I accessed this through info history and just dive right in, and they have this nice little timeline. I love this timeline because it's not just Berkeley Pit. There's a lot more, like, there's like the political aspect, the cultural aspect, the economic aspect. All of these things that go into the drivers of the Berkeley Pit are in this timeline. So they did a really excellent job here. So you can see right off the bat, you can access over here, or you can, sometimes I get really fast looking for what I'm looking for, and so I will just jump right ahead. So everyone knows, right? So 1953, they started drilling for the Berkeley Pit, and we move ahead. Mining begins in 1955. Again, I encourage you guys to utilize this tool. There's a lot of fabulous photos on here, a lot of great information. Move up to like the 1960s, right? They announced that the pit's expanding. I'm just kind of bouncing around. I mean, I realize most of you guys know a lot of this. So let's see here, right? So fast forward to 1982 when the pumps ceased, okay? Again, lots of like, statistics on here, great information on here. It lives within here. Continuing on through the remedial investigations, through the ROD, continuing on, kind of have some lulls. There's still a little bit of addition to be added, but like I said, just kind of a great overall tool. So we're going to kind of be jumping in between those, so bear with us. So I previously worked for CFWEP as well for about 6 or 7 years. And continuing on in my role with Butte Silver Bowl, one of my tasks is educating the public about our Superfund sites in Butte, and then also the Berkeley Pit, okay? So how is it that you talk with the general public or scientists or any kind of experts on this? Well, for me, it's easy because I get the opportunity to take these folks to the Bell Diamond Complex, if most of you guys are familiar. If you ever want a tour, just yell. But the reason it's easy for me is the landscape. Our landscape speaks so much. So here what you're looking at, so here's, right, the Yankee Doodle tailings impoundment, that dam right there. A lot of overburden from the Berkeley Pit. Here is the Granite Mountain. And then I'm just kind of continuing more south here. So just to orient you again, there's the East Ridge. Here's the Berkeley, right, the rim. Here's the Continental, McQueen, kind of keep going. This is like as you're walking down through the property. So this is the diamond head frame here. Lots of really dynamic environment like here, right? Really extreme. Not a lot of vegetation, a lot of great stormwater runoff. All of these things that we talk about, this is like a great place that I feel like to talk about these things. Then you have, this is like the puddle that's like right by the diamond head frame, tests pretty low in pH. And then you walk people up this trail and this is what you open up into, right? So you have this great different view of the Berkeley Pit, right? So your viewing stand is like somewhere down in here, okay? So this is like a really easy tool for me, right? It's not, you know, when I get up here and I start talking about things, my background is as a scientist. So I start with the science, okay? So I start pretty quickly with like, where's the water level at? I give them a quick timeline, right? 1955 to 1982. Talk about when the pumps were shut off, what's happened since then, what it is we're dealing with in the pit, what our problems are. And then as I'm talking and giving this, like, you know, hopefully only 5, 10, 15-minute spiel, I'm trying to get a read of my group, okay? And every group is different. We've had folks from other countries coming in, and they might be with like environmental groups or with like an EPA like ours. I've had geologists, I've had science fair kids. We've had a multitude of backgrounds up there. And so you get a lot of different perceptions when you're up there. Perceptions that are like, why did this happen? Why didn't you guys do something X, Y, Z, right? And again, I always just try to bring us back to the science with this. But then I kind of just let them talk too, and talk out loud, okay? Now, kind of to segue into what we're talking about today, how is it that we take like what we can do out here, how do we translate this landscape into something that people can access anywhere, whether it's newspaper, print, or the internet? And that's kind of where we'll segue into.
Hi everybody, my name is Julia Crain. I am the data specialist data administrator at Butte Silver Bow. I deal with the Butte Priority Soils Operable Unit data and the work that we do there, but one of my other tasks as staff is to work with the Pit Watch Education Committee. And one of the first things I need to say standing up here is that we stand on the shoulders of giants, and many of those shoulders are in this room today, and it's going to be kind of a challenging conversation for me to have because I'm confronting one of the challenges that I face in working in this work because I have in one way or another been educated by Pit Watch since I was in the 5th grade. So in my work, I'm not only working to move into leadership role with the data and the information that surrounds the Berkeley Pit, but I am trying to improve upon the work that has been foundational in my own knowledge and also how we can set the stage to better inform the younger generations in our community. And in beginning, the Pit Watch Education Committee was established in 1955 really with the foundational mission to inform and educate the Butte public about all issues that related to the Butte Mine Flooding Operable Unit. Things like water level monitoring, risk mitigation, and all of the subsequent projects that have happened as the remedy has been put in place in the Mine Flooding Operable Unit. And the role of Butte Silver Bow in that conversation was always to facilitate collaboration between a myriad of stakeholders and making sure that the people who came to the Pit Watch Education Committee and comprised that committee represented a multitude of different viewpoints. The number one and most important component of that Pit Watch Education Committee was making sure that the representation was not only full of half scientists who were subject area experts in geology and hydrogeology, but that they were the lay public who spent time in our community, had their ear to the grindstone and wouldn't know what the public sentiment was at the time, so that Pit Watch education materials could be drafted and developed to meet the needs of the public as they were presented and to address any of the concerns that the public might have had, in addition to educating them about the scientific advancements that were being made at the pit, such as water treatment, or current day, the advancements we are making right now to further treat the pit and to hopefully move forward with the remedy in that area. So ultimately, with the objective, you bring together a lot of stakeholders. It's your obligation to make sure that one voice isn't louder than the other, and that together, through that process, there is collaboration, that there is balance, and that there is objective information that is scientifically sound, but is being conveyed in such a way that the general public can understand what it is you're trying to communicate. And so the tasks were set forth. We need to create presentations for the public. We need to manage our resources so that we can identify contractors that can help us when we have a gap in our own skill or knowledge. And we can develop, distribute, and compile information to get it out to the public. And the first resource that was developed was a print periodical. So this is a scan I took this morning of an old issue of Pit Watch. I think this is actually the commemorative issue of Pit Watch, which was designed to compile as much information that would be able to stand the test of time and educate the public. And you can see here, the back of the issue is just right here, and we have the committee members, and you talk about the people from the community as citizens, and then also the experts, and some of the partnerships that we rely on. But it was also addressing really important public interest questions that were integral to our public feeling like they could live simultaneously with the Berkeley Pit in their community. And that's really important because that's the number one thing we want to understand about the Berkeley Pit is how we can educate the public to make them feel comfortable with the Berkeley Pit. So the website for Berkeley Pit was started in 2002. So for a number of years, really 6 or 7 years, these pit periodicals were created, and they were installed in the Montana Standard and disseminated as an insert. And then they were created on a time period. And right at the beginning of 2002, which is kind of crazy to think about, in 2002, 59% of Americans were using the internet, and now closer to 90 to 95% of Americans are using the internet. So it was a new era. And what we did was we moved the periodical format into the web. And over time, that evolved into a sort of a mid-2010s blog-style format that was the way we did things back in the day. And at that time, we started producing Pit Watch. It previously was 2 times a year into a much less frequent pace. I started to get involved with the Berkeley Pit Education Committee in earnest really right around 2013 as I was stepping into sort of some new roles at Butte Silver Bow. And from 2013 to 2016, I received hundreds of inquiries through the info@pitwatch email address a year. And I was receiving these emails, and I was contemplating how I would ever answer the question. And I immediately did what anyone who doesn't think that they know anything does, is forward the email to somebody who knows more than they do. And it was an acknowledgement not only of the knowledge base of the Pit Watch Education Committee, who could best address the questions for some of those people, but it was also me acknowledging that maybe I wasn't as secure in my knowledge about the resource as I could be. And I was also at the same time thinking about the nature of the questions, and I was realizing that some of the questions that we would see were things that I did know the answer to, but it was really hard to find those answers when you would go to the website. And so we realized we kind of needed to improve the website at that point in time. We were doing these standard updates, but it just wasn't working. Then in 2016, there was another migration waterfowl tragedy that occurred there, and we were receiving media inquiries from all over the world, and they were going to the website and they couldn't find the information that they needed right away. And I was immediately like, okay, this website really isn't working the way that I think it should. We need to get the committee together to talk about how we can improve this. And so we did, at the urging of a lot of people in my work, bringing together the Pit Watch Education Committee to talk about how we could respond to the significant evolutions that had happened from print media, which is what the Berkeley Pit Education Committee was relying upon, toward this much more dynamic web and social media and application-based interaction with information. And that was a moment when I became very aware of my own vulnerability when it came to pit-related knowledge, and how, as someone who was charged with coordinating a body of experts who knew everything about the Berkeley Pit and trying to bring them together to help identify the necessary information in their knowledge bank, and to make sure that we could bring it out to the community and make sure that we were addressing challenges. Recently, I read an interview with Kate McKinnon. She's a SNL comedian who plays women that I admire, like Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Hillary Clinton. And she does that from like a very, very humorous standpoint that almost pokes fun at who they are. And it's always in jest, but wonderful. And in this article, I read this quote, whenever I have to do an impression of anybody, I study them and figure out the way in which I am the same as them and go from there. But the essence of it, which is figuring out what they want and what's getting in their way, is how I approach the character. And I think that this says a lot about knowledge, and I think it says a lot about public service. In our role as public servants, we have to step away from ourselves, in my case, my own vulnerability, my own doubts about my knowledge, to realize that I too am a member of the public, and every member of the committee is a member of this public, and that we all have concerns about the Berkeley Pit. And sometimes when I think about it from my perspective, I have a family that's growing up here, and I acknowledge my own fear and wanting to know that I'm safe. And I think that that is at its core what we are trying to educate our public about when it comes to the Berkeley Pit and really the intent and the mission of Pit Watch. And so I knew two things. I knew that we had undeniable skill, talent, and knowledge on the Pit Watch Education Committee. And I knew that we had amazing partnerships. We had partnerships that were collaborative and they were deeply embedded, and the people who came before me forged those over 2 decades. And that made it possible for us to know that the Montana Bureau of Mines and Geology, Atlantic Richfield, Montana Resources, all of the consultants and contractors that had experience working with those entities and our federal agencies and our state agencies could come together to start talking about this in a real way. And we would do that by staying true to our foundations, which was creating a collaboration of like-minded people who were concerned about getting information to the public. And that is when we made a strategic decision to hire Clark Fork Watershed Education Program, who had a history of doing education really to citizens, lay people, and most specifically young people who are sort of the target demographic and the age group that we were trying to target when it comes to the readability of our information. And that's when we began to brainstorm. And I'd like to introduce Kayla Lappin, who is with Clark Fork Watershed Education Program, to take it from here.
Yeah, kind of picking up where Julia left off. Coming into this project, I was 4 years old when the first print edition came out of Pit Watch, and so I am someone who has had to learn about this as a non-technical person involved in this work, and I think what allowed some of this to happen is that going forward, you had 2 sort of non-technical people approaching it with the committee and with the help of the committee. So first thing I'll say is, it almost goes without saying, but the environmental challenges in Butte are unprecedented and are also complex. Thus, the communication challenges are unprecedented and complex. And what I really mean by this is Superfund law didn't really even come into play until 1980, circa. Okay. And so when we're thinking about how the committee would have approached this in the earlier days, there wasn't actually research knowledge on how to communicate about the Berkeley Pit or an environmental event on this magnitude. The Berkeley Pit's not the only pit in the world, but in the United States, our challenges here are unique to us and unique to the Butte landscape. So I was lucky. I had a committee who had been working on this since I was 4 years old, and I came into this visual or this evolution of knowledge over time. And so I felt lucky as someone coming into this to be able to help build upon what was already established in our community and be able to approach it from a standpoint of what was working and what wasn't working. There was no way to know in 2002 really what was working with the public. We had to wait for that, right? We had to have time on our side, and we have that this time, I think, going forward. So just right off the bat, anyone note any differences in the evolution visually? Anybody? I have a 2-year-old, I'll wait. Patience is like right on my list of virtues to do right now. Words? Someone say words? Yeah. Less words, yeah. So this is the first edition in 2002. It looks like a newsletter you would read in print, right? This was common for web development in 2002. You're dealing with basically HTML formatting going on. I don't know that PHP existed at the level that it does now, and the accessibility of that did not exist. Then we go to flash forward to 2013. This is what I like to call is the WordPress era. You've got this beautiful transition. We've got more pictures that are available. You've got these blog style posting going on. And then transform to today, it's even more visual, less text. this is just a natural consequence of what's going on in the world as far as digital media goes. So let's see. We really paid attention to with this latest version, simplifying using minimalistic design, making sure the text depth is almost non-existent on the first page, so when you get there, you're not overwhelmed with a lot of information. And then furthermore, just using visuals to complement the stunning landscape that is the Berkeley Pit, even though it might be environmentally challenging. So what is said and shown matters. This is taken from a CFWEP publication of the Montana Steward. And the EPA, NRD, BSB, and BPRCO are getting together to create a CD for BIPSU. Who knows what that means? Yeah, all the technical experts do. As a communication challenge, the community response to this type of jargon, I would say, is a visceral response. You're almost like, what are they talking about? I'm not in the club. I don't know what's going on here. And so one of the reasoning, like one of the things that comes out of this is some misconceptions, right? The pits, so you get vernacular like the pit's gonna overflow and flood. It's too big of a problem. What are your initial thoughts when you heard the words critical water level? How does that make you feel?
Well,
Say it.
not well.
Not well. It's critical, right? If we don't do this, I might die. It's critical. Today, we have changed this to protective level. How does that make you feel? Safe.
Better.
Safe. And I don't want, this is the legal terminology in the consent decree is critical water level. So thinking about how we're communicating this to the public is super important. And it kind of ties into some elements of risk communication. The general public reads at an 8th grade reading level. I would almost, that's exaggerated. I might pull it down to a 6th grade reading level, depending on where you're at. When you're talking about risk communication, that level drops to 4th grade, especially in times of like a hurricane, right? You don't need to tell people why the hurricane's occurring. You just need to say, get your stuff and get out, right? So because what happens psychologically is you're trying to process this technical information and you're balancing against that. You're balancing that with your ability to process fear, your fear response. So we know in risk communication too that visual aids enhance comprehension when they're used well. Who knows what this graphic means? That's not a technical expert. This is from a 2015 edition this is from some files I received to help support the 2015 print edition. This was used in a blog post article. So I'm sure the supporting article supported this graphic, but we know that graphics need to stand alone, right? Not using acronyms in the graphics is super important. Too much information translates to the general public, as I'm not going to try at times. This can be seen in the vernacular that our locals use sometimes. Well, I don't know how they're going to fix that problem. How many of you have you heard that? Anyone heard that? I don't know how they're going to deal with that. Part of it can be tied back to how this information was presented in the past. And I want to preface this with, this was actually cutting edge when this graphic came out. It was great. People were excited about it, but it still contained a little bit too much information. Who feels safe after looking at this graphic? I mean, it's just too much at any given time for the general public. Now, Abby's response to this was, I felt really safe, but she's a scientist. So she understands what this graphic means and can pick it up just by glancing at it. Is that how scientists work?
Yeah, I love it. It's like, look at this thing, it's great.
So we've done better, actually. Even Pitwatch has done better. We removed a lot of text in another iteration of what that graphic was trying to get at. But we still have elements in here in red, like the critical water level, gonna come out at you, right? So then, again, too much information can often translate to the general public as this is over my head. I'm not gonna try. This is hard to understand. Let's see. Some tools for engaging with the general public. A basic tool that we used at PitWatch now, and it's been used in the past as well, is some of the reading ease testing. So the Flush reading ease test is based on a scale of 1 to 100. 60 to 70 is acceptable for the general public. Even lower, even higher scoring for risk communication. This PitWatch 2015 edition scored a 37.7. If you translate that to grade level, you need to be a college freshman to understand what's in this document. A score of 8, meaning 8th grade level, would be appropriate. But again, we're dealing with risk communication, so that it probably needs to be more like 4 to 6 level for the general public. Communicating about these topics becomes challenging when you're trying to balance the need for accurate information with the need for a basic understanding of what's going on. And so this is where we acknowledged, and Julia acknowledged, that the basics matter. Retention rates are relatively low for the general public. Is anyone a teacher in this room? Yeah. You guys know all about retention rates and what people are going to hold in their brains. This is lower for risk communication again. So we get into this, we can get into this trap almost of assuming the public has retained information from year to year. And so what we really wanted to do with the new design of the website is make sure that the basics were understood. And we needed to switch from that post style, which goes back to the older editions of PitWatch. This comes directly from print media and is a natural evolution of over time of how we talk about digital and print media today. The articles were the best way to communicate in 2002 and 2013. But now we know that pages with more static information can actually be a little bit more accessible for the general public. And then white space and a minimalistic design do matter. Rhetorical communication studies associate white space with trustworthiness and leadership, which I would argue is especially important with risk communication and an environmentally damaged area. You want to make sure the public can trust what you're saying. And so we really wanted to further establish that trust with the public with this new design.
Kayla, what's white space?
Oh yeah, okay. So white space is the amount of area on a page that is white. Essentially, I'll show you in this design here. This is an example of low white space ratio. So you've got heavy text information, the amount of it's literally the white space on the page. Versus this design here where there is adequate spacing in between each one. It makes sense. You're not bumping up into these other elements on the page. And so this is often associated with being able to trust it and understand it. Even though that might not be the case. Sometimes I want to point out that like this might not be more understandable when you actually read the content, but it is perceived as more understandable. So keeping that perception element in the forefront of what you're doing. Okay, so what we did even further is I took this graphic that PitWatch had refined down, and I refined it down even more for use on this website. We removed all text, essentially, other than the labeling. We refined the colors down. We removed the red color. Red can be often associated with like a cause for alarm. So we removed that down. And then we built upon the elements that less is more. So we used iconography and text, which is, it's great for visual representation of what's going on, but we also needed to keep the text element in there because this is not, to just simply go visual is not necessarily ADA compliant. The Americans with Disabilities Act, it's very hard for people with disabilities to read this level of text, so iconography, so you have to have the text in there. So it's about balancing the visual with what is accessible for people, and also not everybody is a visual learner. Some people need those text elements. Again, with some of the visual design elements that I'll go into are risk understanding is improved when accurate scientific mental models are used. We found that we needed a balance between exact, accurate models and what the public could understand. I'll just go and we'll look at this water page here. But some of the graphics that have been used in the past to explain the concepts are almost, you got to have that balance of overly simplified versus what is actually accurate. So when we were building this water page, we were trying to build it from an understanding that the general public was asking us questions about why is the Berkeley Pit filling? I would argue that is the #1 question received. For those of you that work in with the general public that are technical experts, would you agree that that is one of the top questions received? We built this page really wanting people to understand the flow and movement of water throughout time and where it's moving today. And so, does anybody who's not a technical expert know why the Berkeley Pit is filling? Anybody?
I do.
Okay, so we were trying to put ourselves in your shoes so that that you could understand why it is doing what it is doing. So if you scroll down on this page, you first are hit with a little explanation about what the page aims to do, but then you're also hit with some links about Butte water and what happened to water before mining, what happened when we started underground mining, and then the shift to open pit mining. Again, this knowledge it wasn't easily accessible on previous versions of PitWatch. It was there, but it was not accessible. You had to dig through article after article after article to really get at what was happening. Just to find a single page where all this information was located was difficult. So we had to use a balance between visual and a deeper understanding of what's going on. So we're using text to support the visual, but really understanding what happened with water in Butte. So this is a great map from the Bureau of Mines and Geology showing historic Silverbill Creek channel. We're talking about where water was before the Berkeley Pit existed. And this also is overlaid with other mining things. Some of the things that are really hard to understand, and I can attest to this, and maybe some people in the room will disagree, but I don't know how much consensus there is on groundwater movement in the scientific community. I talked with 4 different hydrogeologists. I got 4 different explanations of how groundwater movement exists, not only in Butte, but in general, and our general understanding of it. Trying to translate that into something the general public can grasp was challenging. And so we really wanted to show a basic understanding of what groundwater was before mining took place, and then a rendition, not exact, of what happens after the Berkeley Pit came into play. So again, you can read about these graphics here and then see them here. Now we'll jump into underground mining. One of the other problems that people don't necessarily understand, this is a great graphic from the Montana Bureau of Mines and Geology, is that the Berkeley Pit was connected to underground mining, and that these are all of the underground mine shafts that existed within the Berkeley Pit. The general public still has a hard time understanding that water was pumped from the hill for over 100 years throughout the mining process. So the dewatering of the hill is just a little bit over the general public's head unless they're directly involved in. So we wanted to use these graphics to show active movement of water being pumped from the Berkeley Pit. And then we have the shift to open pit mining, water still being pumped during open pit mining. Talking about Silverbill Creek moving, looking again, using existing graphics from the Montana Bureau of Mines and Geology. We don't need to recreate the wheel here, we just need to use them in an appropriate manner and supplement what their scientists have already made pretty understandable here. So post-up open pit mining, this graphic we felt was super important because what's not understood sometimes is that the mine shafts are filling along with the Berkeley Pit. I first made this graphic as a straight line filling, and I got quickly corrected by hydrogeologists who said the pit is the lowest point in the system, and actually the mine shafts typically have a higher water level than the pit itself. This was super important to them that be communicated to the general public. Because when we're doing the monitoring efforts of the Berkeley Pit, we don't just monitor the water level in the Berkeley Pit, we monitor, I think there's like 70 plus wells, including some of them in mine shafts. So they really wanted to get this across, that water is filling in conjunction with how you're seeing the Berkeley Pit fill. And it's groundwater filling. This is not a hurricane hitting Butte. So then we just go into, we simplified chemical equations. You can go read through some of this yourself, but basically, I still think this needs improvement. I'm like highly critical of myself of how this could go in the future, and I hope this becomes obsolete in the future, to be honest. I know that we'll keep improving as we move forward with Pit Watch, and I know that we have a team in the committee who wants to make that happen as well. So I will go back to this. Did you want me to? Okay.
So one of the things that we learned when we were working on this website is we know a lot more than we think we do. And we know that we can continue and continue and continue to improve. And one of the first ways that we did that was with this dynamic website that is illustrating some of the technical concepts that we've really struggled to convey in writing or in presentations, but when you visualize it, it helps to make it very clear. Some of the other projects we have coming online are the signage update at the viewing stand, along with a narrative update to the recording that is at the viewing stand, so that we are making a consistent brand for Pit Watch across the community, so that when someone interacts with information at the Berkeley Pit viewing stand, it is the same as the Berkeley Pit education website, which is consistent with what we say when our partners present information at the Berkeley Pit. Also, trying to upgrade and continue to improve our use of social media. I'm starting to get to the point where I am lagging in my own knowledge of the social media atmosphere, but I think there's tremendous potential for the use of something like Instagram, for instance. Just recently I did a tour of the polishing plant at the Berkeley Pit, and I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool if we could film going from the Berkeley Pit up to the Yankee Doodle tailings pond and really following the journey of the water, so that anyone from across the world could understand what it's like to take that journey and understand the path that the water in Butte takes before it goes to Silverbow Creek. And then really using those tools to engage with the public, to have them come and ask us questions. We really deliberated amongst ourselves and with some of our partners about what the tone of Pit Watch should be. You know, you want to be authoritative, but you also want to be approachable. And who are those people in the world that have the right tone of voice and are friendly and can be humorous about it, but also can convey a message? And we thought maybe more of a mentorship tone. So somebody you really respect, like, you know, almost like a grandparent. We hear all of these oral histories about the history of mining. We want to have a tone like that when it comes to the people who come to Pit Watch and listen and learn about what they have to understand. We're going to continue to provide tours through our partnership with CFWEP to make sure that at every opportunity when we have inquiries from educational institutions or other people who are interested from the basin or the region or even across the country, they have an educational experience at the Berkeley Pit so that they can learn more and can really take the time to ask those questions. And also, we're trying to envision what we can do in the future to help people engage even further if they are going to be using digital tools. And so this is a tool. Kayla, do you want to describe
This
this
is
tool?
a tool that was studied. I read a bunch of articles about sea level rise viewers for risk communication and how the need for an active mental model is super important for understanding risk and helping people really come to their own conclusions about what's going to happen in the event of something happen. Like for example, you can see the coastline on here and you can interact with it. You can change the parameters. This is an example from climate change of what will happen. This is from the National Oceanic Association. But how could we apply this to the Berkeley Pit? I think there's some really cool opportunities here for helping the public engage in a way where they're creating their own reality, and they can look at it from a historical perspective and maybe even move it to what would happen if it hits critical water level. They can see that it's not going to flood the city of Butte for themselves. They can see that it actually would contaminate groundwater in Silverville Creek, but not flood the city.
Right.
And that is super important for people to be able to critically think and come to that conclusion on their own for understanding the amount of risk associated. So this would be my dream for the future, but this is a $100,000 tool. And not that we don't have that in Butte, it's just something that we would have to really think about developing. So.
And I think the hope would be that we would continue to work with young people in the community, that we would try to understand the tenor of the community so that we can continue to create content that responds to those things that are happening every day when it comes to the Berkeley Pit. And one of the ways that we've chosen to do that is, rather than using an article format, we're going to be sharing the news that that is related to the Berkeley Pit so that people can access things that are pit related. But we are also welcoming blog submittals so that people can talk about things from their own perspective. I don't know if any of you went to the Bureau's centennial last week, but they had a water bar that talked about the various waters in the state of Montana, and you could drink them and see which tasted better. And bar none, Uptown Butte water was the best, and it's also one of the best waters in the state, and it was pretty cool. So that might be a blog here in the future. So with that, we'll take questions.